Welcome, everyone. This is Time to Talk, and I'm your host, Grace.
I'm your other host, Faith.
We've switched roles again today for the second time, and we're going to do a slightly different topic of conversation today.
If that was a jab at me, or
No,
it was just a fact?
It was purely a fact. It's purely a fact that you generally introduce our episodes.
I do.
And I just contribute most of the time, which is totally fine with me.
Good contributor.
Thank you. Today, I'm not going to be necessarily leading the conversation, but I'm going to provide the context for what we're talking about, and that is critical thinking, current events, history, and all things changes in the moral fabric of society. I don't know. So something
we have some big things to cover, so let's buckle down and get started.
Yes. So the context of why we're talking about this in general terms is everything that's gone on in 2020 and where we are just as in America. I don't think I really need to explain that. Most people, if they're paying attention to anything
it's
outside of their own
season.
home,
if you're not aware that it's election season,
then
you've been living under a rock.
Yes, which you actually may have.
True.
Or in a cave. AKA your man cave at home. I don't know.
Wow.
Sorry.
I did not expect that to come.
Or a simplex closet. I don't know. There can be some people who are slightly oblivious to what's going on, but for the most part, people should know what's going on and be paying attention. So I didn't need to really explain what's going on yet. Aside from that, I've also been taking a critical thinking through current events class at Apprentice University this session, and admittedly, I went into it thinking, what in the world? Why am I doing this to myself? Because if you know me, you know that I don't really enjoy current events so much as history. So I was prepared to both be overwhelmed and frustrated.
You also hate confrontation.
Yes, let's put that out.
And this is a class where it's predominantly guys.
There are
definitely guys who like to voice their opinion on things.
Well, and there are definitely students in there who very much disagree with some of the stances I would take on things. We are polar opposites.
Nicer than I am. I'm over here saying, and there are guys who have opinions, and you're just, yes, there are students who like to be heard.
I wasn't disagreeing. I was adding on to that the fact that several of them have opinions. Like, it would be a different story if as someone who agreed with me was voicing the opinion, because then I'm like, yes, you go say that because it's true, versus someone who's voicing an opinion and belief that's completely opposite and what I believe is false and harmful, and just it's wrong. So, and that just trailed off. Basically, yes, I was prepared to be frustrated, stressed, and not enjoy it. I've actually very much enjoyed it. And I guess to kind of set up the conversation, we can start talking about some of the things we did, which some of our first conversations were around bias and prejudice and stereotypes, and how those, whether or not those are good things or bad things, how you can eliminate bias, and whether or not, how to make the things work for you, because we came to the conclusion, everyone has implicit bias, and it's difficult to completely remove any sort of favor of leaning towards something in your own life or leaning against something just because you are raised a certain way, you grow up a certain way, you have certain beliefs, you have life experiences that inform your bias towards something. And then I guess an easy way to say it is that bias is generally, it can be either for something or against something, but it's often more of an internal thing in the sense of it limits the way you process something and the information you take in. Right? So, I don't know, a really simple example is, I guess, I don't know, if you're going to go get ice cream at the grocery store and you've always grown up with getting like chocolate ice cream, vanilla ice cream, or cookies and cream, it's probably, unless you're a naturally really adventurous person, you're probably going to not intentionally disregard a lot of the other ice cream flavors, but you're just going to naturally gravitate towards things like chocolate, vanilla, cookies and cream, and things that you grew up with and enjoyed. Again, don't anyone attack me if you think I explained that incorrectly. I think I got the gist of it. And then prejudice would be, it's generally a strong dislike acted upon against someone. It could also be a really strong favor for. The example that our instructor gave us was, if you live in the Midwest, particularly Indiana, you have a very, generally speaking, a very, very, very strong prejudice against the New England Patriots. And so
Doesn't everybody that?
Apparently not. I know a couple people who actually think they're good. I'm not going to get into that conversation.
I think they do that just to be different.
You know what?
But Tom Brady is the actual devil. I'm kidding.
My word.
I'm kidding. I know people who think that, though.
Yes. I don't care about football very much.
I've watched one game in about 4 years.
Yeah, I don't have much of an opinion about whether or not they're actually a bad team. And now that Tom Brady's not with them, I don't know. But the point stands of if you're in Indiana, you have a strong favoritism towards the Colts. And so if you see someone in a Colts jersey dressed up as Colts, face paint or whatever, basically someone who looks very clearly like a Colts fan, you're probably going to be like, oh, hey, how you doing? Strikes up conversation, even though that person could actually be someone who just mugged someone down the road and dressed in their clothes, right? Versus if you see someone in a New England's Patriots jersey and dressed up as a fan and stuff, you're probably going to be like, they're such an awful person. Yes, cold shoulder, definitely, even though they could really be one of the nicest people and could be one of your best friends if you got to know them. So that's kind of what prejudice is that it's an even stronger bias towards or against something that you kind of actually act upon that then either harms someone or it very much places them in a position of unequal inequality.
Does it make sense to say that a bias is, you said it was a lot about how you're raised and the experiences you have, but I also think to a certain extent it also kind of has to do with your personality as well.
Oh, yeah.
So just between the two of us, right, I'm going to naturally be biased towards something that is either very logical, well thought out, has more of a defined process to it. It makes sense.
Yes.
Whereas you're going to be more biased to things that are maybe, I don't know, it sounds cheap to say it this way, but things that are more colorful or...
No, and that's true. Is when you're talking in terms of bias, it's a limitation on yourself of what kinds of information you take in my opinion, in that, yes, for you, it can be, you have a tendency to kind of dismiss the more, quote-unquote, flowery, emotional aspects of things, and will gravitate more towards the hard facts.
What I was just thinking of it is house styles, in that I've said that my house, when I have one, is going to be very minimalist and simplistic. And I know that you kind of like more of the colors and you'll have a lot of art on the walls.
Probably. Actually, definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think bias, it makes sense for me to think of it, yes, as when you were saying bias limits what you see. That makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
When you think of it in terms of, it's not just how you're nurtured and raised. It's also... it's the old nature versus nurture debate, right? I mean, it's both for biases. Both of them play into the limitations that you inherently have. Yes. Versus prejudice is one of those, once you've developed enough awareness to be able to choose things and decide things for yourself, not necessarily from reason, but
yes,
in general, be able to at least state that and hold to a belief.
You're able to act in such a way that now your bias is actually impacting another human being, either for good or ill. And so bias again, it can be both a benign thing, but when you're talking about particular things, of whether that's current events or history or theology or something that's truly impactful, it can be very harmful to yourself in just limiting what you're actually observing. And then prejudice is generally either it's you can't really have prejudice without both harming and hurting people, because it's inherently unjust a lot of times, and over favoring someone and under favoring another person. Again, it kind of has gray shades. Like, I'm not going to say that in the example of the New England Patriot, giving him the cold shoulder is like the awful thing to do and you should never do that, but it does.
Well, I think regardless, it's not just a prejudice issue. It's a every human choice issue of choices have consequences, good or ill, and you have to be aware of and to a certain extent okay with whatever the consequences are for your decisions, because you have to live with them. Yeah. I'm not saying if you're okay with being a bad person, you go out and make bad decisions. Yeah. I'm not encouraging that by any means. I'm just saying, even if it feels good in the moment, that doesn't mean it's good in the long run.
And then the third thing is stereotypes, which in this particular case, so naturally the human brain stereotypes and finds patterns to things. If we didn't try to recognize the repetition and patterns of life, we would not be able to function and live, because our brain wouldn't know how to, like, we would never learn.
Has to make sense of things.
Yeah, we would never learn that
new things to old things. And, and makes patterns.
We wouldn't ever really learn, and we would that putting your hand on a red stovetop is going to burn your hand. If our brain couldn't then be like, oh, cause effect. Here's a pattern of how the world and reality works, learns this, and now you won't make that mistake again. If we didn't naturally do that, we would not be able to survive as a human race. But in this context, when we're talking about stereotyping, it is more attributing a particular quality to a whole group that can often go into the negative way of doing that. So, again, I'm not wanting to be super controversial, but this does happen. When people talk about racial stereotyping, it's generally a particular quality of an ethnic group that's now applied to the entire group, whether that's white or blacks or Hispanics. And some of it is very true. So, the thing of Hispanics generally live with a large family in a small house and are very communal. That's actually, I think that's a good thing. I like that quality about them. Some people could say, well, you're just being racial. But the truth is that is a truth of a large majority of Hispanics. And so in that case, it's a stereotype that is somewhat neutral, because it's not...
Well, I think the difficulty with stereotypes in general is its truth sometimes taken too far.
Yes.
Because stereotyping starts from... It's both a cultural thing, but it's also a personal thing, in the sense of you stereotype based on your experiences with that group of people.
Yes.
And thus any interaction you have in the future is now you're creating the pattern, then building off and developing this persona in your head, this stereotype in your head of what these people are. And then it's also a cultural thing of, based off history, here's the pattern we've created as a nation for these people. I also, stereotyping, the thing that people always bring up the racial stereotyping, but that's not the only stereotyping that goes on.
Oh, no.
Like, the first thing that actually popped in my head, and this is a sad example, is... what if you had an abusive father? Like, that you create a stereotype based off your experience with an abusive father that now you think all men treat women terribly.
Yes.
Or, I don't know, like, I'm assuming your daughter in this situation.
Or you have the stereotype of, anyone who's come from a home with an abusive father is going to be like XYZ. Yeah.
So they distrust them. So I guess my point being, I think people tend to... they're biased and think that stereotypes are always negative against another person, but stereotypes actually hurt you as the person stereotyping as well.
That's why, stereotypes do come from it's more than just looking at the general examples and creating... You can do that with a stereotype. You can look at a general broad swath of information and say, here is a rule of thumb about this, but it often does come from I'm going to take my personal experience and now project this across a group as a whole of whether or not they're nice or mean, or they lie, or they tell the truth, or they're abusive, or they're loving, or they do this, or XYZ, and they make this amount of money, or this amount. There's so many things that go into a stereotype, but I guess for a working definition for this conversation, it's often about taking a personal experience, either of yourself or someone you know, or historical things that you know, and then projecting that across a group as a whole.
This, actually, that just happened this past week. I had dinner with a Ukrainian family, and both of them grew up. The husband specifically grew up during the Soviet Union, and then into the fall of the Soviet Union, post-Soviet Union in Ukraine. And he made this comment when we were leaving dinner. He was showing us some of the Ukrainian and Russian, and some other countries, the mementos and things that they have.
Yeah.
They have some, old Soviet Union money and things that, and awards from his father, who was a scientist during the Soviet Union and stuff. Really, really neat stuff. And at one point, he was showing me these, are they called Matryoshka dolls? I always forget the name.
Yes. You mean like the nesting dolls?
Yeah, what are...
Okay. We're just going to call them Russian nesting dolls, because I know that's what they are.
Yeah. Matrushka.
I think you're right. I don't know how to actually say it.
I don't actually know how to say it.
The nesting dolls.
I know how to say it if someone says it to me. And then anyway, so yes, he was showing me the nesting dolls. And he made this comment of, these actually aren't Russian. They're actually Chinese.
Yeah.
Or something. Or Japanese. Japanese is what it is. And then Russia kind of usurped that and started making them. And he started going on and saying, all Russians are stupid. And the only people who have been smart were people who came from other countries and lived in Russia for a certain time, but then now they're considered Russian because they became famous in Russia.
Interesting.
Anyway, because I made a comment of, no, Russia's had famous authors and composers like Tchaikovsky and Dostoevsky and Tolstoy. And he goes, no, actually Tchaikovsky was a Jew. Dostoevsky was German, Prussian, Polish, and moved to Russia. Blah, blah, blah. Which, I'm not going to deny that actually is true. They moved from other places. They immigrated to Russia and then did become famous there. I don't know if Tolstoy actually... I actually think Tolstoy was a Russian.
I look him up right now. I want to say Tolstoy was Russian.
I think he was Russian. Yeah. So this is what I was going to say about stereotyping. So this guy, granted, based off his experience of being in Ukraine, which the tensions have always been there between Ukraine and Russia and the Soviet Union, I can see why he would believe Russians are all stupid and dumb. But that does not mean there are some brilliant individuals who have come from Russia, such as Leo Tolstoy, who was whatever Yasnaya Polyana. I don't know, whoever that is. I butchered that name. He was Russian. The other person I also just looked up is Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who also was Russian. So there you go. You have two brilliant, world-renowned authors who are Russian.
Interesting.
My point being, stereotypes are understandable, but still wrong. And that it's because they're founded off some type of truth, whether that it be a fact or an experience or something. But it's taken too far. Yeah. It's taken to the extreme.
Like another example would be saying all Irish people drink because
St. Patrick's Day is the big drinking day.
Yes, and as a rule of thumb, it would probably be you could probably get away with saying a lot of Irish people drink a lot more than people in other nations because it is a cultural thing. But to say like to assume every single Irish person you meet must drink a lot because they are Irish would be incorrect.
Or another thing that just happened in one of my classes yesterday, it was business admissions, and one of the girls started saying afterwards, she was talking about, because for our final end of session project, we are creating a business that's going to have a missions aspect and everything anyway. And so she was talking about things that would be involved, and she made this comment of, I just don't like how there's this idea that if you're an African, you make crafts. And that's literally the only contribution you can make to the world is make crafts. And that's all that people sell. Yeah. And
she has a good point.
She's correct. And that was her point is, I don't think that just because of the nation that you're born in and the continent you're born in, that we should relegate you to this specific vocation in your life. Because God determines what you're made for, not man. Yeah. So it's wrong of us, it's sinful of us to impose this arbitrary idea that because you live in this third world continent, you therefore have to make crafts. You can't be smart.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to there's the Asian stereotype too of they're supposed to be like really smart and super successful, and some of it's true, but a lot of that is culturally based in this they're a shame culture, and so it very much does rely upon them being successful and doing certain things and not doing right. So it's founded in a truth of how they culturally function, but it does limit a lot of, like, you could have an Asian artist who is amazing, and sure, that career may not be as lucrative as being a scientist, but it doesn't discount their abilities. And so, and there's a lot of things about that good and bad. And a lot of it is stereotypes don't allow for the exceptions at most of the time. They're not general rules of thumb in this particular, and in the way we're talking about them. They're not here's how a particular group generally functions. It's here's how a particular group functions. So just keeping that in mind.
Because a lot of this, even prejudices and bias to a certain extent, because it's taught, they're all, a lot of them based on first impressions of people. And it makes sense in the fact that as people, and the entire human race as a whole, and to survive throughout the years, a lot of it has to be, you have to have some sort of judgment on first impressions in order to keep yourself safe.
Yeah.
And understand who's friend and who's foe. And that's not atheistic or evolutionary. No, that's just a human fact of...
Yeah, it's true.
This is how God made us to be. That
well, there's like a certain amount of seconds in a first impression that you've now, whether or not you consciously realize it, you've come to the conclusion of whether or not you like this person or you don't. And a lot of that, unfortunately, is based on physical appearance and a demeanor and the air of someone versus necessarily what they say. So you can't say a lot in 10 seconds.
Yeah, what I was going to say with that is, it's not that you have to make the commitment now that you're never going to be a biased, prejudiced, or person who stereotypes. I mean, you can't.
That's impossible.
Yeah, it's humanly impossible for you to recreate how your brain was created to function. The key is just to be aware of it and where you have your blind spots and your own faults, and getting people around you who challenge you to think differently and live differently, and not from a place of narrow-mindedness. What I was thinking is, I brought up the idea of you and I just based on personalities having differences, but I was just thinking based on the conversation about stereotypes and people, what I also find interesting is people's preferences for languages, and thus their preferences for the peoples who speak that languages. Because I know you are biased towards romantic languages, the romance languages, because of how they flow, in that they're beautiful languages. And they're very expressive. Whereas I actually don't mind languages such as German or Russian, that to the ear sound very harsh and guttural, but I love them because of the depth of meaning that those languages has. I mean, we've talked about this before. German literally has a word for absolutely everything. The most minute expression of the face, the most minute expression of the soul. German has a word for literally everything, and I really want to learn how to speak it because of the fact that it is a very philosophical, rich language. Doesn't sound pretty, but I love that aspect of it. Whereas you're over here learning French and Italian and these beautiful syllables that are just like honey dripping from your tongue. Is the image that I think of.
No, it's true. I would like to say, and I do think it's true to say that I love all languages, but I will say in terms of what I have chosen to learn, for multiple reasons of whether or not, I took Latin, and so a lot of the romantic languages derived from Latin, so it's a little easier, and frankly, Italian and Spanish are so similar at times, you're like, I don't remember!
Which word is what? I'm just gonna throw one out here and hope you understand what I mean!
Yes. But they all, so for those reasons, it was easier to start with the romantic languages, but it is also the fact that some of it is I want to go visit Paris and France, and I want to go visit Italy, and I want to visit Spain, and these places where these languages are spoken, and I do. They are more musically pleasing to the ear than something like Russian, which is basically consonants. Wow, continents. Wow. Consonants. That's what I corrected myself. Yes, it's basically consonants.
They actually don't have.
They have very few vowels, sounds.
Well, it's also because they use a different alphabet than ours, and so when you translate the Cyrillic alphabet to the Phoenician, is that what we use?
Yes,
Phoenician alphabet. It is. You have the vowels, but when it's actually written in Cyrillic, it's completely different. And
there's the Phoenician one. There's an Arabic alphabet.
There's the Cyrillic alphabet.
There's the I can't even remember what the Chinese alphabet is called.
Right.
Because it's not just China that has that particular.
Well, because it's different because
like,
it's, to my understanding, it's actually not even used anymore. That's more of a specialization now. You're not taught that type of alphabet.
Yeah, I don't
You're
know.
actually taught from a more
I remember
American
that.
form.
So I don't know.
Your language.
I don't know what the Mandarin, what that would be called. So
good.
Anyway,
question.
we have completely now derailed this into languages instead of history.
Grace, nothing is off topic in this
No,
podcast.
it's not. So now that
it's just called the Chinese alphabet.
Okay, interesting. So now that we've talked about bias and prejudice and stereotype, where do we want to go from here?
I was thinking we could either take it into our personal frustrations with our current cultural, political
but we have to keep
situation.
It under an hour.
Grace, we're already at half an hour and we haven't even gotten to the topics that we were supposed to be discussing. I can't talk discussing. It's our podcast. We can set the boundaries.
So this is going to be like a 5-part podcast episode.
It might be. I mean, here's the thing. These issues that we're facing never go away. And I was just talking to a friend this past week. We had dinner and I was talking with her. And her family is more of the position that they stay away from events such as the presidential debates because they don't... It's not that they're an optimistic family or anything. It's just more of they don't want... I mean, she said it in terms of they don't want to introduce that type of negativity into their lives. But I also think it's just because they are one of those people. We just talked about this when I sat in on your class the other day, is the debates have become less about deciding who's actually going to win the presidential election so much as entertainment. And so her family is definitely that group of people who they already know who they're voting for. They've already made their decisions. And so they've chosen not to waste the time because they see it as a waste of time to watch the presidential debates. Okay. Anyway,
so why don't
what was I going to say?
Since this is going to come out on the 23rd of October, which, this is the 23rd of October.
Yeah, we're recording this on the 10th.
Yes, we're recording it a little bit in advance.
So we're very well aware that things are going to change.
Things probably have changed in the half hour we've already spent talking.
Yeah.
But
deal with it.
Since this is going to come out, we're probably going to talk a little bit about the presidential election and things that are going on in politics, just because we won't have another podcast coming out until after people have voted. And things
we
have
happened. No idea what's
not
that
I'm about to say that I'm going to change your opinion about who you're voting for, but I think
that is not the purpose of this episode.
No, I think it's helpful to have some context too about different people's opinions, because again, we're going to set this up as we're going to try and be as little biased and prejudiced as possible, and as least bipartisan.
Fully understanding that we can't.
Yes,
to a certain extent.
Fully admitting that I'm going to try and be equally harsh to both parties and things that are going on. Yes, I'm using the word harsh because I am just setting you up to, this is probably not going to be talking about the positive things necessarily. We may have a few things, but it's probably going to be overwhelmingly us kind of spouting frustrations with the American people and populace and political system in general.
That being said, I also don't want to be entirely negative in general because I know that our parents and just older generations in general, most of the ones I know have taken an extremely negative view of America and our future. Yes. And while I want to be realistic, I don't want to take it into complete and utter cynicism about the world because, as a Christian, I understand we get to vote, but that does not mean that we are shaping human history because we turn in a ballot for somebody. I believe we have a responsibility to vote, but in no means do I believe that voting changes. Grace is choked on her coffee. Am I getting too inflamed with the passion of my speech right now? I'm kidding.
No,
just me. No, she just forgets how to drink sometimes.
I do.
Anyway, I don't believe voting changes the track of a nation, and at the end of the day, regardless, I believe that God holds everything in his hands, and my vote does not change his plans for the world, and so I don't want to fall into cynicism because I know that God, I mean, this is going to sound cliche because it is a bit cliche, but as a Christian, I know God is working everything out for good for his people, so selfishly, this isn't selfish, like, the Bible says this, like, as a Christian, I know that I am safe in his hands, regardless of what happens. It doesn't mean I'm not going to die or something. I mean, I hope not, but I know that eventually he has us, and it's not, it is not up to me to make sure I am safe and I am protected and I have a secure future. I already know I have that in Christ.
It's that balance of, God has a plan, and so
you trust
it's like plan. It's the balance of he has a plan and you cannot mess up his plan, no matter what you do. But that doesn't mean you don't do anything. You still have, and especially like if we're talking about positives, we are really blessed to live in America and to have the freedoms that we do have. But the very fact that we live in America and have those freedoms means that we are more responsible for protecting the freedoms and the rights and the way of life that we have than almost any other nation in the world, right? When the founders created the constitutional government that we have, they made it very clear that the only way it would continue to exist
is if we stayed vigilant
the Republic,
and involved.
Yeah, is if we had a citizen, and I can't remember. I know there's a Thomas Jefferson quote. There's a Reagan quote too, along these lines. But there's a Jefferson quote where he's basically saying that the only way the Republic is going to stand is if we have an informed and engaged people.
Sure it's a Jefferson, or is that a Washington quote?
No, it's a. There's a lot of them that said something. I mean, whether you go to the Benjamin Franklin quote of a republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. There is a Jefferson quote of basically like if the people are not enlightened.
Is this it? Is it? Thomas Jefferson is oft quoted as having said, "An educated citizenry is a vital requisite for our survival as a free people."
Yes, I think that's it.
There's actually no evidence he said this.
Okay.
It's a widespread agreement that it captures the spirit of his writing.
I think he also actually wrote something else that I know.
There is a Washington quote I know because I've written a speech with this before, which was something along the lines of democracy dies when the people are no longer involved and informed.
Yeah, again, several historical figures and presidents have said things along those lines, both from the founding and throughout history. But the point still stands, and that it was set up in such a way that, yes, hopefully the political system itself would be able to regulate things just naturally, but without the involvement of the people. It's a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And if the people aren't involved in that government, it will inevitably fail. You can't have something that's for the people, by the people, of the people, without it being with the people. You can't. It doesn't function. And so a lot of my frustration stems from the fact that I think as a populace, we have failed in keeping the Republic in many ways that we were supposed to, and we have let things happen under our watch because we haven't been vigilant. And simultaneously knowing that I am still incredibly grateful to be living in America with the freedoms, with the rights and the responsibilities that we have as American citizens. And then to your point, as a Christian, also being aware of the fact that yes, God has a plan, but it means that the way I interact with the world, I have potentially even more responsibility than a normal, quote-unquote, American citizen because I'm a Christian. And just, I have a responsibility to steward both my home and where I live in just the locale and the community in which I live, but I also have a responsibility to do as much in furthering Christ's kingdom on earth. And that means that as an American, I'm going to vote a certain way that I believe is consistent as much as possible, understanding that politics are a fallible human endeavor and structure and government, but as much as possible that what the political platform is and the policies that they're going to enact are consistent with a Christian belief and way of which the world should function.
Right. And some of that is to be proactive in how your nation is shaped and governed. Some of it is, I don't know if preventative is the right word, but I'm thinking about, is it Romans, right, where it talks about how you need to have submission to the authorities God has placed over your people and your nation, but you also have to be informed in that when that authority goes against what Scripture says, it is your duty as a Christian not to obey that authority and to obey what God says first and foremost. So it's that balance of you need to be involved, one, to affect change as much as possible, but also for your own faith and salvation. I don't know if that's the right way to say that. Not that salvation is based on works or anything, but my point being, like, for your own self as well. Like, I don't want to just go along with something that is totally unbiblical. So I think it's that you have to be involved to also know what's wrong, right? And what you can't be in supportive and what is in disagreement with Christianity and what God says.
And at the end of the day, I think it's 2 Peter where he writes about praying for those in authority over you, which extends both to anyone in authority over you, but especially to political figures and governing bodies, as well as you recognize that these people, I frankly think we are often very harsh on our government individuals, and just I'll see a lot of the negatives versus the positives, and we don't give a lot of grace for the amount of things that they are doing and stress that they're under. Again, not excusing the fact that there are legitimate criticisms and critiques we can give of individuals in whether or not they didn't, they're being hypocrites and not standing by what they said they would do, or they're not doing anything, or there are legitimate criticisms that you can give of politicians, but there is a certain amount of grace and prayer that can be extended and should be extended to them, so that whether or not you disagree with someone, regardless of what you think about someone or disagree or agree with them, you should still be praying for them, that they can fulfill their job to the best of their ability in a way that they are keeping, for politicians in general, they are able to act in the best interest of the nation or their state or their city or their, Yeah,
because at the end of the day, these people are people. They're just like us, and they are broken, sinful people who without Christ can do absolutely nothing of good. Right? I mean, yes, they can have positive actions that are influence things for good, but in and of themselves, they're not. I think, especially in America and other places in the world, but in America, I think there's just been this trend that we look at our elected leaders as it's part of humanism, and that man has become his own savior. And I think it's translated into government, that we think our government is what has to save us from our problems. And we cannot save ourselves.
No.
Regardless of the power and the money and the influence that we have in the world, that does not correlate to now you are somehow more righteous and more able to save people and guarantee their eternal happiness and sanctification. Like, that doesn't, it doesn't translate. And I think we expect too much, wrongly expect too much from our elected leaders when they are just people like us. But I also think you were talking about how, we see the negatives more than the positive, and that's a fact that, right, as people, it's that image of, you can have a whiteboard, and all of it is white except for this one tiny black dot, and our eyes are immediately drawn to that black dot. We see the negativity substantially more than the positive, right? We're drawn to it like moths to a flame. And I think it also has to do with history, right? In that history's always written from some sort of bias. I mean, you just can't. You can't have something that's unbiased. And especially in Western civilization and Western history, I think bias is evident in more things than in other things. But the example that came to mind is someone like Genghis Khan, way back when, who was, I don't know what you want to call him, mass murderer. I mean, he and his army wiped out people in their endeavor to create one of the first empires, which ended up being unsuccessful and everything.
I mean, it's no different than the Assyrians and how they built their...
But my point being, we look at a man like that and we can vilify him for the atrocities he committed against humankind. But on the other hand, God obviously used him in human history, and that's not to say that what he did is now understandable.
It's not to say that what he did was right.
But I just think, it's, again, it goes back to my comment of, as people, we take are it only into our players own hands. On a stage and in a story that God is writing.
Yeah.
So while we have the freedom to make decisions and choose our own actions.
And we should make decisions.
Yes, at the end of the day. And we should be aware of those decisions and the consequences they have.
And we should be making informed ones. Like, we should be playing the role to the active.
Yes.
Not being passive. We should be
actively involved. Don't be the passive player, be the active player. But at the end of the day, it is God, and he's going to use those actions and those consequences in the story he is writing. And so it's...
Yeah, God's going to use someone like Napoleon or Hitler or Babylon or Roman Empire or anybody.
He's going to use it for his purpose and for the good of...
Ultimately, everything is leading to...
Yeah, I don't know where I was going to say, like, the good of his people and stuff.
Well, so. I mean, Romans does say it's God is working out all things for the good of those who love him. So that is true, but it's also true that God is working all things out to bring himself the glory that he so rightly deserves, right? And so... Again, it comes from a perspective of we are fallible and we cannot understand the infallible, and we're finite and cannot understand the infinite.
This is why I don't like when there's questions about, if you could go and change one thing about your life, or if you could change something that happened in the world, or if you could go back to, the classic argument of if you could kill Hitler, would you have done it? And I don't like questions like that. One, because they're hypothetical, and I don't necessarily like
put
thinking
too
about,
much,
but it's also in
our hands of
it's
trying
that
to
pressure
save.
of it's that loaded question of assuming that as a human, you could have changed the course of history anyway.
No, and like, you could have killed Hitler, but someone equally evil could have risen up too.
Right. It's this idea.
It's not a foolproof method of destroying World War II.
Here's the thing. We actually just had this conversation in our business admissions class too, and we were talking about the Tower of Babylon, and that, to a certain extent, not that I want to rank sins, but the Tower of Babylon is one of those sins where we progressed from... I mean, the original sin in the Garden of Eden was believing that we could be like God, right? And then the Tower of Babel is the same thing of, let's become God. Let's make a name for ourselves, build a tower to bring us to the heavens so that we can rival our creator, right? That is the ultimate sin, placing ourselves above the person, not the person, the creator who made us and who we literally survive every single breath we take.
And it's
we
the foundation
are dependent
of
on him.
Every sin is the belief that we don't need God.
Right, and so
we
that's
can be
what
our own
I'm
God.
saying is, when people ask questions like, if you could have killed Hitler, we are assuming that we are like God, and that we shape the narrative. And the problem with that is we're not like God, and it's the whole pattern of human history that we are going to try to raise ourselves up to the level of deity and then come falling down because God is God and he does not stand for that. I mean, this is why I think, people talk about the Roman Empire brought its downfall upon itself, and yes, there's truth to the fact that debauchery and slothfulness and just the gluttony and sinfulness is going to bring us down, but that's more of a general statement versus no. I think what actually brought the Roman Empire down is they thought they would last forever. The Roman Empire, they took themselves up to the height of, now we rule the world. Well, we are the power. We are the authority. And God's like,
no, you're not. I am. No,
I don't do this.
Studious.
Not that God actually talks like that. But
no, God is not a 25-year-old entitled bitch.
God is
using that word.
He was... Wow, okay. I guess
Sorry.
we had to put an E rating on this podcast now. Grace, thank you very much. But anyway,
God is not a 25-year-old.
God is sarcastic. He is sarcastic towards Job in the Bible. I mean, okay, he is kind of funny at some point. What I'm saying is, right, we are so prideful when we think that we have any say in where this world is going.
Yeah.
Our lifetime is a blink in God's eyes. I mean, we are blessed to be able to contribute in any way to the story of the world.
Yeah. Whether or not...
We should take that as a blessing and understand the significance of it. We should not take it for granted and never let it go to our heads and thinking that we somehow in and of ourselves have any sort of authority or power over other people, over nations, over the track of the world. Anyway.
No, and You know,
off my soapbox now.
a personal, wow. A perfect example of that, I think, is Calvary itself, right? Of the Jews thinking they decided who the Messiah was and who was going to save both them and then everyone else, when God made it very clear that's not who they thought was going to be the Messiah. Wasn't the Messiah. And in their arrogance, they actually ended up crucifying him, which, you know, that's like awful. That's awful that you would kill the very person who came to save you and everyone else from the fallenness and brokenness of the world. And yet that very act is exactly what was going to happen and needed to happen.
Which, on that note,
in order for that to happen.
You finish what you were going to say.
Well, if you're going to say something about that particular example, you can talk now, but I had a few other things I was going to say too.
Well, the comment I was going to make was, isn't that a perfect example of the worst event in human history has been the killing of Christ?
And the best
But
event.
it's also... No, but what I was going to say is, but it is also an event I would never want to have changed.
Which makes me, like... Yeah,
which
I would never change the crucifying of a...
If you start there and you get people in agreement that it's that question of, you know, if you could go back in history and do this over again, like, don't ever ask that about the crucifixion. Terrible, horrible event. The killing of God, right? I mean, that's just, I mean, you should be sober about that event because it is. It's awful, but it's also, don't ever redo it. Because that is where your salvation is, in the sacrifice of Christ.
Again, it's assuming you didn't need that.
Right.
To be saved. And you do. You needed a perfect, innocent, sacrificial lamb to be slaughtered for the covering and forgiveness of your sins. You needed that. And
to bring us back to right relationship with God.
And I'm just going to throw this out there because we were talking about it yesterday in our Tolkien Lord of the Rings class, and just the whole idea of a eucatastrophe, which, for those of you who don't know, catastrophe also obviously means like that things have now become awful, and you're, you know, whether that's a natural disaster or someone dying.
It's an implosion of negatives, or an explosion of negatives.
I mean, the word literally means to turn against, right? Yeah. It's things turning against you. And a eucatastrophe would be things, it's things turning upside down, but also right side up at the same time. It's things seemingly being awful and yet somehow
having a happy ending.
Somehow, not necessarily happy ending, but just having the right ending, and things coming into their right place and ending the right way, right? So in The Lord of the Rings, the perfect example is Frodo at the very end. Again, if you haven't read them, I'm sorry, I'm not going to qualify this with a spoiler alert, because as our instructor likes to say, there are two people in this world: those who have read The Lord of the Rings and those who will read them. So,
okay,
I don't know,
or at least watch them. Even if you watch the movies, you'll
at least learn about them
anyway.
At least learn about them, and so the eucatastrophe, the main one in the books, is Frodo, who has gone all the way from the Shire through this a simultaneously awful journey and a journey with lots of light, but 90% of the story is dark. It is so dark and it's so sad and it's so awful. But our hero has made it to this point where he's at Mount Doom. He can get rid of the ring and destroy it and destroy that evil from Middle-earth. But it's at that moment that he decides, no, it's mine. It's my precious. I deserve to have it. I'm going to keep it. And Sam is left with this awful decision of basically killing Frodo, because Frodo's decided he's going to keep it. And
thus destroy all of Middle-earth.
And thus destroy the entire reason they came on this journey in the first place. But the turning point is when Gollum, who up to this point is just a hideous, awful creature who leeches off of people and has only played a negative part in the story, and yet it's at this point where how Gollum is and the character he is actually ends up saving Middle-earth, because he attacks Frodo and he bites the ring, not bites the ring, but he actually bites off Frodo's finger to take the ring, and then in his moment of gloating about it, he steps one step too far and falls into the burning lakes of Mount Doom, right? And thus destroys himself in the ring. And that's the eucatastrophe. And then in that, Calvary itself is a eucatastrophe, right? Of here's an awful thing that's happening, which is humanity turning against God incarnate and saying, no, we decide who's going to save us, and it's not you, and we're going to, and killing you. But even in that awfulness, God is turning things the right way.
God is always present and always working. Scripture tells us this.
Yes.
And that is a perfect example of, if you trust in humans for salvation, you will always be disappointed.
Yeah, if you trust in us to make the right decision, it's only by the common grace of God that we can even make right decisions at times.
Right. It's only by general grace, God's common grace to the world, that we are even
in existence
still living with people who are unbelievers, right? That we ourselves are even where we are right now, because we are born into sin and live sinful lives until Christ saves us. Anyway, what I was going to say I was going to tie this back to, I know too many people, and unfortunately too many Christians, who are looking at this upcoming election and thinking and believing that salvation for America is dependent upon this election in a way. And I don't know if that's necessarily, I don't believe that that's the thought process they're going through, but that's what I see, in that they are so scared of what might happen because of the fact that they are believing that our future is dependent on who is president next.
It's like you kind of mentioned with the Roman Empire. It's that, yes, the sins and everything that was going on contributed to their downfall, but it goes back to the Roman Empire believing they would last forever. And I feel like that's how it's like, in a slightly different way, that is what has manifested itself in America, is just this, it's this general passivity and laziness when it comes to believing so arrogantly that you can sit back and just let things happen, and your nation will continue to exist as is, and you will still have the freedoms and be able to do what you want. And the truth is, you will not. Which is why yes, it's holding the two things in paradox and tension, right? Of, no matter what you do, things will turn out the way God has planned them to, but that does not mean you don't do anything.
Yeah, you don't just sit back and watch.
Yeah.
That is sinful in and of itself.
God
has called us
who you vote for,
creators and active agents in his world.
The person you vote for president of the United States and vice president may not win. But that does not mean that
God's not
there.
In that. He's not failed you simply because your chosen candidate is not the next administration.
Yes, and again, things were complicated to begin with, and just how that all works, and who things have probably become more complicated. Just because, I mean, going all the way back earlier to what we said about the debates and being entertainment, like, I would honestly argue that the instant televised debates were introduced, it definitely became more entertainment and based off someone's charisma and appearance versus the quality of what they actually said and the substance of what they said.
That she said that when Kennedy and Nixon, because they were the first televised one, that if you looked at polls...
No.
Kennedy won.
Yes, it was her, and I think it was also brought up in. It was also brought up in my Tolkien class. We were talking about
multiple people, and it was that if you looked at polls, Kennedy won the election based off the very first presidential debate being televised, because even in black and white, he looked the part of a president.
He looked strong.
But then if
he looked healthy,
people,
he was handsome.
Then if you polled the people
based on who listened to the radio, Nixon won hands down,
because he was much more articulate, and
he had substance to what he was saying. Yes. So
anyway,
I mean, I would very much argue, and clearly there's a lot of facts to back it up, that the instant things were televised versus us just listening to them, or even actually going to, something like the Lincoln Douglas debates, or
it became significantly more.
It became entertainment versus a debate about ideas and policies and political platforms.
Well, because here's the thing. If you bring something into people's homes and into their everyday life, it becomes significantly less valuable.
Yeah. So to the family that you were mentioning who don't watch the debates, honestly, I don't really have an opinion about whether or not you should watch them.
Right.
The only thing I care about, again, is you making an informed decision.
Right.
So, again, you may not agree, and I don't think you ever will agree 100% with a certain political candidate's positions on things. But I also don't think you should not vote for a person based on whether or not you like them. That's not, it's not an emotional, it kind of, it can be an emotional thing because emotions, I think, are, it's important to make a whole,
part of decision,
like a holistic decision, right? You can't just completely deny how you feel about something and only do it based on rational thought because we are both irrational and rational creatures.
Well, you'll drive yourself crazy if you make a decision either based on emotion or purely on reason. Like it's just not possible. You'll drive yourself batty by trying to do that.
And you won't be able to live in that dichotomy between rational and irrational and emotional and logical. We are meant to be all of them at the same time. Like, we don't have just a right brain and a left brain. We have a whole brain that works in connection. And yes, the left brain may be more logical and the right brain may be more creative, but without them working in conjunction, you're missing something.
Right? Yeah,
you're missing something.
And let's be honest, the phrase or the compound word, whatever it is, it's like-minded, not same-minded. Let's be grateful for the diversity that we have in the world and that we are not all clones of one another, because that idea is absolutely terrifying.
Oh my gosh.
I already know that I am messed up in so many ways. I do not want another person messed up like I am.
I want me to be the only one of me ever.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Again,
I mean,
I'm joking.
Yes, for both good and evil. Like, I only want there to be one of me because I'm screwed up enough.
The world cannot handle another one of me. They don't need to, because I'm enough to handle on my own. Yes. Again, both negative and positive, right?
Well, that's the thing, is you have to think about the negatives, right?
So I guess my point is, I think for the most part we've kept this actually fairly bipartisan, because we haven't talked about, in this instance we haven't talked about the specific individuals, but the point stands. If you are not aware and considering what you believe about things and are only voting based on whether or not you like or don't like someone or love or hate someone, I don't know if you, I'm going to say this and then probably immediately regret it, but I'm like, I don't even know if you deserve to vote. Like, if that makes sense of just...
Wait, you don't deserve to vote
meaning
you're voting based on personality and appearance?
I don't know. Maybe I'll, again, I said it and then I'll immediately regret it, because it's just...
I mean, my argument is no one deserves to vote.
Right? If...
It's a gift.
The presidential... Any election for a political figure should not be based on emotions. It can involve whether or not you like someone, but
be a responsible voter.
Yes,
is literally what you're encouraging.
Be informed and responsible.
Understand the significance of the blessing that you have as an American citizen to have a say in your government. Treat it as the blessing it is and the responsibility it is.
And vote for someone. Informed. Vote for someone who both is like-minded and has whose policies align with what you believe, but also you're not the only one who they impact. They also, again, this is where you could get into the conversation of people not understanding what the executive branch is for and the legislative branch is for and the judicial branch at all levels.
That's just a topic on the failure of American education in general.
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic, but I think it is important be informed about what that person is actually being elected to and what the responsibilities of their office are, because someone is going to have more impact directly. I mean, the phrase is politics are local. At the end of the day, politics are local. So you can put all of the importance on a presidential election.
Vote only during federal election seasons.
But the truth is, yes, the legislative branch of the federal government is going to have an impact on local state government, because the Constitution is set up as the law of the land. And if a state government's law contradicts the Constitution trumps it.
Right.
Yes. And Congress is the one that makes the laws that then become the laws of the land. unless it's, again, in conflict, at least I believe, again, correct me, unless it is in direct conflict with the Constitution.
They can't.
Right. That would be a matter of the Supreme Court then deciding whether or not it upholds the Constitution or not. But yes, basically what I'm saying is pay attention to who you're voting for, what office and the responsibilities and authority they have in that office. Keep in mind that you are not the only person who is going to be affected. It's both an entire nation, depending on what it is, and it's a state, it's a county, it's other people around you who are going to be impacted. So do keep in mind other people's interests, and not just the interest of your particular socioeconomic group, your particular ethnic group, your family. Like, it's more than just you. Think.
I was gonna say think globally, but no, you don't actually think globally. But just think Americanly.
I don't know.
Naturally.
Right. Yes. Think about others and just be aware of your biases, be aware of your prejudices, be aware of where you fall short, and be informed. And vote responsibly. Yes.
And understand.
And just vote, please.
Yes. Vote.
Again, what people don't understand, you don't have the option of just the two candidates who are nominated by the two parties we have. You can write in someone. And
write in your own name, for Pete's sake.
I mean,
just vote.
Yeah. The likelihood of the person you write in becoming president is pretty low, but that's at least letting your voice be heard in the way it should be heard versus not doing anything. Because, again, it goes back to the active versus passive involvement. If you're not going to do anything, you've just assigned yourself to the sidelines versus actually playing in the game. Because it is kind of a game.
Oh, I have so many comments to make on this now.
Do we just need to do to do several other
I was thinking
episodes.
About a conversation I listened to the other day that was on staying involved with a church or leaving a church, something about the 1% change. And now, okay, here's what I think I want to close with, and then you can chip in if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the most important thing is understanding we are not our own saviors. The people we elect into public offices are not going to save us. And here's where it's going to be controversial it is not a capitalistic thing. It's not a socialistic thing. It is a human thing that as sinful people, we want to raise ourselves to be like God, and we want to be our saviors, and we will be our own downfall because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's played out throughout all human history, regardless of religious beliefs, economic beliefs,
political
beliefs,
ideology,
whatever you want to say. You raise yourself up to be the tyrant and the savior of your people, your nation falls. You raise yourself up to be an empire and an emperor and the god of your people, you fall. You raise yourself up to be a big government and have all the answers and control every aspect of human society, even though it's a quote-unquote free society, you fall. I mean, it's unavoidable. It will happen. Thank goodness it will happen, because it just means we're one more day closer to Christ coming back.
It is by the grace of God that they fall, and that humanity has not yet destroyed itself completely.
Right. So that's my point of do vote, but understand you're putting a person in power, not a savior, and your life and your future are not dependent on that person. Regardless of what happens, it is in God's hands, and the world can get crazier, the world can get more deadly, we can have a World War III, but God is still in control.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to add much more to that, because it's true. At the end of the day, no matter what you do, we are history, humanity, all of creation, and the universe is in the hands of God alone. And He is the one who knows where it's going and what's going on, because He is the infinite, the omniscient, the omnipotent creator of the universe. And yeah.
Boom. Mic drop. I'm kidding. I don't know. I guess we just close this episode out right now. The only other thing I'm thinking is, let's sing the doxology or something.
Oh my goodness.
But I think we're just going to close it out.
I think so.
Are we done? Thank you for listening. I mean, hopefully this conversation was beneficial for you. I know we got very impassioned, and I'm not going to apologize for any of the passion that we displayed. No. I know that we were not trying to be shy about our beliefs.
If we offended you, I'm not going to apologize, because sometimes people need offended.
I need offended sometimes. I do.
She does.
I need to be put in check.
Let's put it, actually, you know what? I don't care if I offended you, because that's the wrong way to take it. If I offended you, it's because you maybe need humbled from your arrogance.
We need challenged.
And I will fully admit, I need challenged and humbled at times too. I need to be proved wrong and that I failed. I need to admit that.
Yes, let's have a conversation. Let's not just get up in arms about things. Let's have a conversation about things.
So yes, hopefully you, whether or not you like this conversation, because again, we just kind of ranted against liking or not liking things. Hopefully you have now some new thoughts and perspective on things, and can have those conversations with the people who disagree with you, who somewhat agree with you. Like, all we wanted to do was just spur you on to, again, be informed about things and have conversations and open dialogues with people, so that you can play the active role you need to play in your society.
That being said, we really do hope that you liked the podcast.
Yes.
If you did, please subscribe. Go leave us a rating and a review. Head over to Instagram. We are at Time to Talk. So we would love to see, I was going to say your face there, but I guess it's just your profile there. So we'd love to have you join our little community online and send us messages, post on our pictures. Or,
we'd love to know if you guys
on our post. I
just
totally butchered that.
Wow.
Whatever
First of all,
on
see your faces.
Yeah, let's see your fist.
All of the words are just getting mixed up now.
I'm talking too much.
Oh my goodness. No. Yes. We'd love you to engage. Leave us any comments. Fine. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on iTunes. Literally wherever you listen to podcasts. Yes, you can find us. And I guess the only thing I would add is we'd love to know if you guys want us to talk more about, not politics, but just talk more about history and changes and responsibility and all of these things. We'd love to know what questions you guys have, whether or not they actually even relate to this podcast, but just in general, any questions that you guys would like us to, any questions, topics you guys would like us to address and talk about. And yeah, we joke about how almost every single, we didn't want this to be a literature podcast, but almost every single episode we bring up a book, and just face it, we are going to, because we read. So that's going to happen. But we'd love to know what other conversations and topics you all are interested in and would like to know more about. So whether that's a comment on a post or you can just direct message us. I feel
we are more than open to feedback.
Yes.
Thank you, Grace, for this rousing conversation.
You're welcome.
This was fun.
I knew you would enjoy this.
But sadly, we have come to the end. And until next time,
cue the cool music.